So how are we going to cover what we're going to cover today? So I thought this would be kind of interesting to ask ChatGPT a couple of questions about this sermon. And this is very instructive. I told ChatGPT, below is a transcript of a sermon by Gideon Hull. Please tell me which theological perspective would best categorize the speaker. And ChatGPT says, Gideon Hull's sermon appears to reflect a theological perspective that aligns most closely with Reformed theology, particularly with the context of the doctrine of election. Here are some key points from the sermon that support this categorization. And then it gives me the emphasis on God's sovereignty and election, foreknowledge and predestination, total depravity, glorifying God, active faith and evangelism. Okay, so ChatGPT, this is interesting. If you are a church member out there and you are curious, hey, is my pastor a Calvinist? If they are on YouTube, go to YouTube, get the transcript, because it's right there in YouTube. Copy and paste it right into ChatGPT and just ask it, what is the theological persuasion of this speaker? And it can give you an unbiased answer. I think that's very interesting that we have that tool available to us now, take away some of the guesswork. Because I'm not saying that that's infallible or foolproof or that you'll always get the right answer, but I think that it's interesting in case anybody's questioning. Now, another thing that makes it very interesting about this particular sermon, why am I covering this sermon? Why am I reviewing this sermon? It's because it's the second time this guy has preached at this church. This guy is not the pastor. He is one of the student ministerial intern type people, you know. I don't exactly know what the position is, but he's actually about to leave and he's about to go to seminary, which is not co-located where he is. He got his undergraduate degree somewhere else in theology, and now he's about to go somewhere else and get his degree somewhere else. Now, it's very interesting to me, the topic, on this topic, he actually very clearly articulates all the Calvinist beliefs. We still don't know what he thinks. We probably never will. He probably never will. But he very clearly articulates all the Calvinistic beliefs. And I cannot help but suspect that the senior pastor, whose name is James, put this guy in this situation. I don't know how much Calvinism was going on before this, but I was very interested in new Calvinists, okay? Like newly programmed NPCs. And it's also interesting, first of all, from a psychological perspective, a newly programmed brain to say all the Calvinistic things, like the egregore has colonized a new mind for its territory. Now, what does that look like? What does that sound like? Okay, we're gonna look at some of that, what some of the word choices are. But also, it's interesting that perhaps the previous pastor was not as bold in his Calvinism. So what he can do is he can use this young student preacher who's newly indoctrinated, get him to very clearly articulate the Calvinism very boldly and very clearly and very plainly as a litmus test to the congregation. And if the congregation likes it, great. That's the green light that Pastor James can go on and just open up the floodgates and release all of his Calvinism out instead of tiptoeing through the tulips like they tend to do when not everybody knows what they are. On the other hand, if the congregation does not like what young Gideon preaches, then senior pastor James is in a position to say, well, he's just young, pray for him. We sent him off to seminary. He'll learn better. He's not going to be around here, so don't worry about it. You see, it's a litmus test. It's a get out of jail free card litmus test. So he doesn't have to show up and preach it and get people upset with him. He uses this kid, this newly indoctrinated kid, as a litmus test for the congregation to see how they respond to clear and plain Calvinism. Like Roberta is just said, a stealth surrogate. A stealth surrogate. Now, I want to be clear about something. I don't think that young Gideon Hull here, I don't think that he's evil or bad or horrible or anything like that. He's just a kid. And kids cannot help but be brainwashed. As a matter of fact, when I was, I think, right at his age, I was convinced to become a Calvinist in the exact same way he was, and I spent a couple of years there. So my professors at the University of Mobile were Calvinist. My pastor was a Calvinist. I was against Calvinism to start with, and then they coaxed me into it, and I sat in Calvinism for a bit. Okay, so I'm not saying that he's bad, but it's a case study in what can be how a human mind, how a impressionable, cognitively undeveloped human mind can be programmed into doing something a certain particular way, which is not good. So yeah, even ChatGPT recognizes this guy as a Calvinist. Very clear. Okay, so I ask again, ChatGPT, are there any significant insights in this sermon that are not found in other Calvinistic or Reformed sources? ChatGPT, Gideon Hull's sermon does not introduce entirely new or unique theological content that isn't found in other Reformed sources. Most of the sermon's theological points align closely with well-established doctrines within Calvinism and Reformed theology. The unique elements of the sermon primarily lie in its delivery and illustration rather than in presenting new theological insights. Now, what is this? The delivery, he has this illustration about puppies and the puppy peed on his brother and choosing that kind of thing, so he's got a little story in there that he tells, and that's pretty much it. That's really all he's got to offer, other than just repeating like a computer what you can already get elsewhere. All right, you can see this because I covered up for these videos, but I have all kinds of Calvinist books behind me. I had to read all the Calvinist books to get my theology degree from my Calvinist professors who successfully converted me to Calvinism. So here's what I tell Calvinists all the time too. They're like, oh, they want to have a discussion with me, or they want to comment, or they want to debate me or something like that. And my question for them is, why would I spend time rehearing from you what I have already heard from other Calvinistic sources? So you're not even a person. I've got these books, okay? I've got John Piper. I've got John MacArthur. I've got the sermons of R.C. Sproul. I've got all the literature. I've got all the sermons. I've heard it all. I've read it all. I'm familiar with it. I've studied it. What are you going to tell me that they haven't already told me? Are you going to give me something new? Now, maybe every once in a while you run into a Calvinist who has a clever new post hoc rationalization, some new philosophical reason to doubt the Bible. Okay, that's all Calvinism is, by the way. If you want a definition of Calvinism, it's clever philosophical reasons to disbelieve the Bible, or clever philosophical reasons for why the Bible isn't true. So, while professing to believe it, because atheists have clever philosophical reasons for why the Bible isn't true, but they don't profess to believe it. And Calvinists have clever philosophical reasons for why the Bible isn't true while professing to believe it. And they'll say things like sola scriptura, and then everything they do contradicts every verse of Scripture. There aren't any passages of Scripture that say Calvinistic distinctives. Did you realize that? There aren't any passages of Scripture that say Calvinist distinctives. There are none. There are zero. The phrases total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, particular redemption, however you want to say it, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints, not in Scripture. The phrases aren't in Scripture. The definitions aren't in Scripture. The way the doctrines are spoken now or read out, either in the Institutes or in the Synod of Dort, in the Remonstrance, in the Contra-Remonstrance, and none of that stuff. None of that appears in Scripture. There are no passages that say Calvinistic distinctives. Okay, now that word distinctive is important because when I say that, I'm referring to things that are unique to Calvinism. Okay, because Calvinism, because it's a parasitic religion, and because it embeds itself, it has to have a host religion, like a parasite. It has to have a host religion to live in order to survive. And it's basically the vestiges of Manichaean Gnosticism have picked Christianity as a host body for it to be a parasite in. And so when something like wokeism shows up in the political landscape, you're like, whoa, political landscape is secular. This woke stuff is religious. You can recognize its religious overtones, and it is uniquely religious because it's a mismatch for the arena in which it presents itself. It's much more subtle with Calvinism to understand that it is a completely separate religion because it has chosen to represent itself in the arena of religion, in the arena of Christianity, okay, which is a faith-based, whatever you want to call it. I know Christianity is not religion, it's relationships. Don't do all that right now. Okay? It's not the place for that. Just understand what I'm saying here. Okay.